Hello, I'm Mixcuster Animations, and today I'm wanting to talk about my favorite aspect of Japanese language, and that's Japanese personal pronouns. Specifically, I want to talk about how they're used in Kamen Rider. I was originally going to talk about Tokusatsu as a whole, but then I realized that I'm mostly just a Kamen Rider. So it's going to be Kamen Rider and a few other pieces of media that I also have unique examples from. Alright, so what are Japanese personal pronouns? That's a good question. They are different words you can use for I and me, first person, as well as you. Also, he and she and they, but I'm not going to get into that today. It's self-determined, so you're not determining other people's gender by calling them he or she. That's very rarely used in Japanese. Instead, you're going to use words for I and you that indicate your gender, or how you present your gender, as well as project your status, determined by formality and your age, etc. This is what got me interested in learning Japanese in the first place. I think I first heard about the concept from a Deltarune theory video. I'm going to be talking about Deltarune a lot. I was really interested in it. Then when I started watching Geats last year, I looked up the Wikipedia page for it, and I was like, oh my gosh, wow, I can hear what they use, and it matches the page, and that I was really interested in that from that point. And that's the first thing that I really wanted to learn in Japanese, and now I'm full on learning Japanese. God, head cough. There are very nuanced ways to use it. A lot of them have different use cases, and sometimes people will switch between them depending on the situation. So it's dependent on the environment and the person that's using them. Alright, so first we're going to go through first-person pronouns. These are my favorite. There are a lot of them. I'm not going to go over at all as many as there actually are, but mostly just the most common in media and in real life that I know of. First up is, of course, watashi. This is what you're probably going to first be taught for first-person pronoun when you're getting a Japanese course. That's because it's really flexible. It's feminine in casual context, but it can also be completely gender neutral in formal context. Watashi is the basic default choice for women and girls to use. I have a couple of female writers up here as examples, but it's mostly just if you have a female character, they're probably going to be using watashi, maybe atashi, but I'll get into that later. And down here we have a variety of not female characters who use watashi, and they use that for a variety of different reasons. Don Kuroto and Gaiamatsu, they probably use them more to sound formal, put distance between themselves and everyone else. George, for the same reason, he does use ore when he is very emotionally vulnerable, but that's only a couple of scenes. Ellen probably also to put distance, or to because he's not human, so he sounds strange. That's same as Don Kuroto. Naki and Rita are both non-binary, so they likely use watashi as gender neutral as well. I've not watched 01. I don't know much about Naki's character other than they're non-binary, but Rita definitely uses it because they are very formal and want to be impartial. So they use watashi to put distance between themselves and the rest of the world. I wish Ellen was the same. That's just my headcanon. I think they're very non-binary. Ore is by far the most common masculine pronoun used in writer. That's because early 20s and teens males almost exclusively use it. So you can see the photo I have here of the Heisei writers, and 3 of them are scratched out for not using ore. even then, two of them do actually use ore, but just when transformed. That's a whole different thing. That watch the show to figure that out. But the actual characters, the protagonists, don't use ore. They use another pronoun, and Wataru just doesn't use ore. The rest of them do, though. Even the nice guys, even though you'll probably be told it's a very rough, maybe even rude pronoun. That's just because it's extremely common for people of the age of writer protagonists to use. It can also be used by women, and it sounds very masculine and very assertive. Susie from Deltarune, I told you I'd be getting into that. She does use ore, and funnily enough, she actually says ore sanjo in chapter 2. I thought that was the coolest thing ever when I found that out. And Shita from Gav also uses ore to sound masculine, as opposed to Jeeb using watashi. I didn't fit that in the slide because that would take up too much space already. Ore is also associated with other language to use throughout your sentence, so that's ending particles like zo and ze, other language choices. Boku is a softer masculine pronoun. It can almost be gender neutral sometimes, but it's mostly used by males, as you can see. This is my favorite pronoun to talk about. Why do I have a favorite pronoun? It's got a wide variety of uses. So over here you have Ryotaros and Ryotaro and Atropos to some extent. They use boku, pronounced boku with the emphasis on the bo. I should be pronouncing it boku, but for some reason I just don't. That's more of a young kid kind of way to pronounce it, and that makes them sound very young. And down here, Hiyori is a bokuko. She uses boku, even though it's pretty masculine. That has to do with her character a lot, and I like that she still uses it. By the end, I was hoping she would, because I grew out of it. Bokukos in general Japanese society are sometimes considered to be not taught correct gender roles, not having a proper upbringing, or being distanced from society, and that both of those things are very important to Hiyori's character, not having a proper or a standard upbringing, not having guardians from a very young age, and also being very, very cut off from the rest of society, just cutting herself off. We also have Oct from Splatoon. They're obviously not a Kamen Rider character, but they also use boku in the original Japanese version of Splatoon 3 Side Order. This is interpreted as them being non-binary in the English translation, and I am 100% on board with that. But in Japanese, they're mostly just supposed to be a bokuko. They mostly use boku in Japanese because they're a hip DJ, sort of on the fringes of society. I'm an artist rather than I don't want to interact with society. These characters are a wide spectrum. I actually haven't watched Saber or Kiva, so I was very surprised to find out that Wataru and Rintaro both use boku. All of these characters are generally using boku because they're either just very nice people, just generally nice people, like Ryotaro, who's kind of a pushover. Philip and Urataros definitely are the more cultured aspect of the pronoun boku. It's something that boku is sometimes associated with being a cultured person. Michi to an extent too. Ryusei and Emu are interesting because Ryusei just uses boku before his identity is revealed as Meteor to the rest of the cast of Forze. He's trying to pretend to be a nice guy and just non-confrontational. He actually uses ore, but he uses boku when he's pretending to be someone else around the cast of Forze, which is basically just putting on a nice guy mask. And Emu, without trying to get into war, Emu himself uses boku, but uses ore when transformed, and that's a whole other thing. But basically just like Emu himself uses boku, and that's probably on a meta level to distinguish himself from the side that uses ore. But he's also like a very nice guy. He can be pretty like almost too nice sometimes. That I think I went over everything. Atashi is similar to watashi. Sometimes I have trouble figuring out which one they're using. It sometimes uses the same kanji, which is why I don't have many examples, even though there are definitely more characters who use this. But the website I was using, Kamen Rider Zukan, the official website, in a lot of cases uses the kanji that also is watashi for characters that use atashi. And that was very annoying. It's a more girly pronoun than watashi, so if characters who use it will often be like very cheerful, very like useful, or have an emphasis on their femininity. So we have Yoriko Misaki, aka Tackle, and Miho Karishima from aka Kamen Rider Femme, Misaki from Kabuto. I assume Narashiko as well, because she is obviously based on Yoriko Misaki, but I couldn't find anything that says so. We have Yuri from Kiva, Akiko from Double, and Akari from Ghost. It's also commonly used in the Edo period, which is like the early 1900s. Sham uses that to sound like that way in Deltarune, but I didn't put an image in because I didn't want to feel like I was referencing Deltarune too much. Just that's what they use. They don't use like any other feminine language, so that's how you know they're not using it to sound like feminine. Washi is mostly just in fiction. It's used by old men. Here's just a variety of old men characters that use it. You get the gist of it. That's about it. Jibun, I hate this pronoun, and it's the one I use. We have two whole examples here. Well, just one whole example, and also akuseijo. Jibun basically means oneself. Like, everyone uses it to, when they're saying, like, myself, yourself, themselves, itself, stuff like that. But it can also be used as a first-person pronoun sometimes by some people. It's completely gender neutral, which is why a lot of non-binary and queer folks use it when speaking Japanese, but it's mostly used by like people in the military, police, and athletics, stuff with very strict hierarchy. There's this quote from Legends of Vocalization, which is much more detailed than I can put it, places a clear distinction between the speaker and the listener. When you're like talking to a visitor, an instructor, a potential business partner, etc., this is where you can use it. Kiryu Kujo from X-Aid uses Jibun. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe because he's like bike, so sports, and then Jibun. But it might also just have to do with his personality. I'm not sure. Akuseijo from Boombunger. I noticed a couple times using Jibun, specifically when he's on the duty acting in the role of police officer, so that's him using Jibun because of his job as a cop. Uchi is a girly, feminine, cheerful pronoun originating from the Kansai region, which is Western Japan. It's not that common. I could only find two prominent characters who use it, which is Iroha from Shinobi and Mei from Saber. Atai is something that's not very common. It's kind of like Itachi, but it's more like a don't mess with me kind of delinquent, sometimes used for trans femme characters like Vivian and Paper Mario. The two notable examples I could find are Love Cove, surprisingly, from Rebus, and Hirobil from King Oger. Also, when I looked it up on Zukan, there was also this random guy from the Ghost Hyper Battle DVD. Ware is a very formal pronoun. It's often regal, sometimes very odd or strange sounding. All of these are not always used by someone. I could only find Suel using it as in the form of ware ware, which is even more formal, and it's a plural form. Ralsei from Deltarune again, sorry, only uses ware before he takes his cloak off at the very beginning of chapter 1, so he's trying to sound formal, very, like, prince-like. Hiromi uses it in his catchphrase, waga inochi o kakete, etc. He doesn't actually use it any other time, I think. Waga is a possessive form of ware. Kogami is... he mostly uses watashi, but again, he uses ware ware sometimes. But wait! There's more! Oh boy! Second-person pronouns. These are a bit more complicated. Second-person pronouns are like you and your, but they're not as commonly used as those words are in English because most of the time they just use the person they're addressing's name instead to be much more polite. So if you're going to use second-person pronouns, you're most likely just addressing a complete stranger or someone that you know really well. It's not as important as first-person pronouns. They are used pretty often in toku, or like fiction in general, than in real life. I don't know why, but that's how it is. But they don't really matter as much, and they're much more fluid than first-person pronouns are, at least in toku. So the examples that I'm going to be putting on screen are much more random and just like, oh yeah, sure, I'll get a photo of this guy because they showed up on the search. This is anata, the most basic second-person pronoun. It's similar to watashi in this way, but it's completely gender neutral, not just feminine, even though it's mostly used by female people, as you can see. That's just because there's not as many options for women for second-person pronouns as there are for men. They can also be used as like a pet name by wives for their husbands, like dear or honey. Kimi is something that's usually used by people who use boku, but not always. Not always. Dark Kabuto and Daichi are good examples of people who use boku, and Kimi. It's slightly masculine like boku, and it's usually addressing like lower or equal status people. Omae is something that's commonly used with ore, but not always. Again, there are other pronouns, second-person pronouns that uses of ore can switch to. It's pretty masculine and sometimes rude, very casual, like you could use anata when like addressing something slightly formal, but not omae. There's a gag in one of the build recaps where Manjo calls Kazumi Omaya, and she's like, "No, I'm 27. Don't call me by my name." That's really weird for someone who doesn't understand the meaning behind that. Clotho from Couchart also uses Omaya, which I think is cool. She uses watashi as her first-person pronoun, but Omaya as the second-person pronoun, and I think that's cool because she's very masculine. Anta is also a feminine pronoun. It's considered more feminine, I think, but I've also heard a lot of male characters use it occasionally, just for specific situations. The only character I know to always use Anta is Baroba from Geats, and it's sometimes like confrontational or flirty, but it's probably less rude than Omae is, at least in Nintendo's eyes. Tamaya, mostly pronounced Teme, is like a more confrontational pronoun. It's mostly just used in fiction, I find. That's what I've read everywhere. It's used like for everyone by Hanaya Taiga, but it's probably by other characters as well, but I couldn't find examples of that. It's a very rude and masculine pronoun, but not as rude as Kisama. This is basically meaning you bastard, very masculine. almost exclusive to fiction dialogue. These are characters who like use them in quotes. Again, Hiromi uses it in his catchphrase. These are like other characters who use them in famous quotes. Kaito uses it all the time. Kaito from Gaim. Because he just hates the entire world and everyone in it. And that's it. That's my whole spiel about personal pronouns. I'm sure I missed something. Maybe like I don't know. Like I'm sure there's another Bokoko character or another example of using atashi or teme. So if you have any additions, criticisms, suggestions, please comment down below, and I'd love to hear them.